Welcome to the Don't Count Me Out podcast. This program is dedicated to stroke survivors, loved ones, and caregivers, medical professionals, and anyone interested in learning more about this devastating disease and the warriors that face it every day. Our mission is to share stroke survivors' stories of inspiration and hope, form friendships and community, gain knowledge and insight, and the courage to dream and explore new avenues as we find our way back to living. So, my friends, the Don't Count Me Out podcast begins right now. We have two amazing women. Their story is incredible. The first person that I'd like to introduce is Michelle Omar. Is that correct?
Omar, yep.
Michelle Omar. We'll tell you more about her in a minute. And I'd like to introduce to you is Danielle Berzon.
Oh, beautiful. You said it perfectly.
Thank you. So we're going to begin back on a cold winter day in Iowa. We'll find out where both of them were and what happened. Michelle, I'd like to start with you. I know you were at work. And expecting a typical day at the office.
Yeah, if we can ever have a typical day.
Exactly. Tell us where you were. Tell us what day it was, what the weather was like.
So at the time, I was a patrol sergeant with the Cedar Rapids Police Department. The day was March 4th of 2012. It was one of those days where we were right about freezing. And so during the day, it kind of rained and it was kind of transitioning to snow. So the roads were not bad, but not ideal.
Were you on a bridge? Did you have black ice? I remember when I lived up in Chicago. Oh, that was terrifying to drive on.
Yep. So we got sent on an accident that had happened on a overpass over our river that goes through our downtown. And this was on an interstate. So anytime we have an accident up on the interstate, we send multiple cars just because, traffic's going 55, 60 mile an hour. And we just want to make sure that we protect everybody, the officers and the people involved in the accident. So there was officers up at the accident over the river. And then I was sitting probably about 200 yards back from the accident. And then there was another squad car that was about a quarter mile behind me trying to get traffic to move over so they don't interfere with the accident that was up ahead and the officers and citizens that were out on foot on the road.
Were you parked just in one lane or were you in more than one?
So I was actually parked on the inside shoulder, 6-lane divided. So 3 lanes going in each direction of the interstate. So I was sitting on the shoulder, and so was the squad car behind me. And then the accident was actually in the lanes of traffic. So we're trying to get traffic to move over to the outside lanes so they wouldn't interfere with the accident.
How long had you been a police officer?
Oh gosh, at that time I had been on for about 9 years.
This wasn't your first rodeo.
No, not at all. And at the time I was one of the supervisors from the evening shift. So the rest of the people up there were officers and I was the supervising sergeant.
I'm not sure what that meant, but you were the new kid on the block.
Yeah.
Danielle is with us. Let's get to the day when you got onto the bridge or the highway and you were going towards where Michelle was in this other accident. You were young, you were in your 20s. You were, I'm sure, thinking about what was going to be happening in your day that day. Were you used to driving on snow, or was that kind of a new experience for you?
Well, I don't think driving on snow is a new experience for anybody who grew up in the state of Iowa. That day never came back to me, but I did read the police report. I did see the newspaper accounts of the accident. And I do know from my Facebook what I was doing. So I was coming home from church. I didn't have to work that day. Sunday was my day off. So I was coming back from church and I was going home to my off-campus apartment. I was a college student at the community college, Kirkwood Community College here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So I was going back home to my off-campus apartment. And then I had a dinner plan with my college friends. We're about to graduate that semester and spring break was just about to start. I had a lot of international friends and some people were planning to go back home. We all were just going to get together for a dinner that night. So that's what I was doing. The ice, I guess, black ice, I think it said in the report, just got the best of me. And the rest is history because that day did not come back to me. I just want to stress. So I do have flashbacks of being in the hospital when I was in and out of consciousness. I remember seeing my pastor's face and my brother's face just briefly. I have flashbacks of being in the hospital, both at St. Luke and the University of Iowa hospitals, but my mind did not fully regain strength, did not fully come into consciousness until I was at the On With Life Brain Injury Rehabilitation Center in Ankeny, Iowa, about 100 miles away from where the accident was in Cedar Rapids. That's where everything I can recall everything fully from that point on. Till then, I just have flashbacks, and none of the flashbacks involved that day I was driving. And I met my guardian angel, who's here with us today.
And Danielle doesn't remember the day. I understand that, and I think most of our viewers will as well. What was the first thing you remember of the crash? We did not mention that you had training for EMT situations. Had you already gone through that training by that time?
Yeah, so before I got hired with the police department, I went through and got an EMT certification. And by that time, I had been volunteering with a rural EMS ambulance service for about 9 years, 8 years, something like that. So I actually, on my off time, volunteered with an ambulance service.
You know, it just amazes me when I talk to the two of you, how often we do things in life. You may have gotten involved with it because it was an interest or a passion that you wanted to serve in that way. But so many times we bring things into our lives and we have no idea why we're doing what we're doing. And then somewhere, and it could be years later, like you said, 9 years after you had this training, the service that you provided for Danielle as she saved her life. So tell us what happened after you heard the big bang.
So they always tell us when you're up on the interstate doing traffic control not to watch your mirrors. So I was absolutely oblivious until exactly right. There was a big bang and all of a sudden my car was facing a different direction and I couldn't see out my windows because like the back window was broken out and the trunk was crunched up a bunch. And so all of a sudden I didn't understand what had happened and what was going on. And then I heard the officer that was sitting about a quarter mile behind me say over the police radio that I had been hit. And so that kind of made the connection of, oh crap, you know, this isn't good. So then he drove up right behind me in a matter of seconds and got out of his car and saw that Danielle had actually been ejected out of her car. Flipped another switch in my mind of, oh crap, you know, I have a job to do. And so I need to get out and do what I'm supposed to do and provide medical aid and go from there.
Danielle, I'm telling you, when you do things, you do them up really big. I didn't realize that you had been ejected from your car. Oh my goodness.
That's where I suffered the traumatic brain injury because of the impact of the being ejected. But then I also went into cardiac arrest. Thankfully, I had ran into her vehicle and she had the presence of mind not to worry about, okay, like her vehicle is damaged. Like she just immediately heard that there was another individual who was like ejected. So she just went into action. And when somebody goes into cardiac arrest and needs CPR, like every second counts. And like she got to me fast enough that I didn't have any residual brain damage, which is like amazing to me, like considering the circumstances, the accident, the bad weather, the ice, she got to me fast enough still to restore me.
My gosh. I'm just taken by all of the events and how they just all fell into place. Glad you're still with us.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, Michelle, now did you realize, did you have any injuries?
At the time, I was still kind of taking the whole situation in, didn't really realize that I had been injured. I ran back to where Danielle was and like I said, she had been ejected. So her body was shaped like an L. So her legs were like up against the passenger side door of her car and her upper body was laying flat on the concrete. Oh. And so, like she said, when I got to her, she wasn't breathing. By this time, there was another officer that arrived. And so I told him to grab his AED, which also serves as our first aid kit. So he grabbed that and he came over. And fortunately, he on his off-duty time was a first responder with a rural fire department. And so I opened Danielle's airway and he got out the mask and he started breathing for her. At the time, she still had a pulse, but she just wasn't breathing. And so it's just a matter of time before, the body started shutting down even further and she lost a pulse. So we breathed for, until the fire department and the ambulance service was able to get there. And when they got there, they came over and saw the seriousness of the crash. And so they went back to their rigs and got a bunch of equipment. And then once they had all their equipment, they took over medical care of Danielle.
And then, okay, now I got to ask the question too, because we shared the story because when we met for the first time, I knew all of this, but how long were you guys breathing for me, Michelle? Do you know how long? Like till I could breathe on my own?
I don't have that answer because ambulance and fire took over for me and they continued breathing for you. I don't know at what point they stopped.
I had to start breathing on my own within 4 minutes because I would not be here. So you have a time frame. I realized it was like for that many minutes, I was not breathing. Oh my God.
I think with the head injury, your body just didn't know what was going on and kind of forgot to breathe for you. We bought that time until your body was probably able to take back over and start breathing for you.
You're right, Danielle. You have some mighty angels following you.
No, I kid you not. This is my guardian angel we're speaking to. Because had she not been there with that presence of mind, yeah, I would I would be dead because they wouldn't have restored her, or like she said, had they got me to stay alive, I would have had such residual brain damage. I could be even still hooked up to machines to this day because people can stay hooked up to a respirator for like decades.
But you had a lot more that you needed to do in your life, and you still do. Michelle treated her, you helped her to come back and begin to breathe again. Her heart's working okay. Then what? You just go back to normal, or now all of a sudden you realize you need help yourself?
Yeah, so the other officer that was actually breathing for her while I was opening her airway, once fire and EMS got there, he turned to the firefighters and was just like, hey, Michelle was in her car when it got hit. Somebody needs to take over for her. And so they stepped in and took over holding Danielle's airway open. And then they took me off to the side. And I ended up actually going to the same hospital that Danielle went to initially to get treated.
Do you want to go in and see how she was doing when you were at the hospital?
At the time, I knew she was serious enough that they were kind of getting her stabilized. And then there's a hospital about 20 minutes away by ambulance that is a level 1 trauma center, which meant that there was no opportunity for me to even check in on her because there was so many people working on her that I would have just been in the way.
So that was the end of it for this part of the story for you?
Yes.
And now, Danielle, you're in the hospital. How long you were in there?
I think it was about 2 weeks. I was in the ICU in the University of Iowa hospitals and clinic, that level 1 trauma center Michelle's talking about. I went to the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics. So they got me stable. The doctors realized that I would live. I was out of danger at this point, but I didn't fully regain consciousness until rehabilitation because I was drifting in and out. Some days, I remember my professor and my brother told me, yeah, some days I would just be sitting up in my bed. They would come to visit. I would be sitting up in my bed and then my eyes were open and like they would wave their hands in front of me and just like, they're like, yeah, you didn't see nothing. You're just like a shell. Just fast forward to rehabilitation. I get to On With Life, brain injury, rehabilitation. And there I regained consciousness fully. They took me off the medications that were keeping me unconscious and they just let my brain heal on its own. And I remember the night I fully came to it. Like I stayed conscious for the whole day. I remember the night it happened. It was in the middle of the night and I opened my eyes and I was underneath this enclosure because I would toss and turn a lot. I'm a restless sleeper and even unconscious, I was very restless, too much energy, my mom would say. So they had to restrain me to the bed because they didn't want me to toss and turn and injure my brain, which was already healing and had a lot of swelling. So I had to sleep with restraints underneath an enclosure. My wrists and my ankles are restrained to the bed. Not handcuffs, but the plastic restraints. And I'm thinking in my mind, like, okay, where am I? I had no idea. I'm like, I thought I could have been in some type of trouble. I didn't know where I was. I started screaming. I remember a CNA just rushed to my room like twice that night. And then eventually she gave me something and I was out like a light to put me to sleep because I didn't recognize anything, didn't know where I was. Like, and then the next morning, remember, they flipped on the lights in the room between 6:30 and 7. They want you to start getting back to normal. They won't let you sleep all day or sleep past a certain time. You had to wake up in the morning, do your exercises, do therapy, to have breakfast. Everybody had to wake up. There's no description. And you know this, Joanne, being a stroke survivor, like after you suffer a brain injury, there's just no way you can describe how tired you feel. I just want to put this in everybody's minds. The most tired you've ever been, times that by about 100. And just imagine being that tired every day, all the time. And that's how tired I was. The thought of waking up, I had tears in my eyes. And just the thought of just waking up and moving because I was so exhausted because I had been up half the night screaming. I was so exhausted. I went through the day and I went through these various therapies. I just went through the whole day taking everything in because I had no idea where I was, but I was still afraid in the back of my mind because I remembered how I had awoke that night with the restraints. I was still kind of afraid that I may have been in some sort of trouble. So I was afraid to just ask anybody until the night I asked if I had a cell phone. The CNA let me make a phone call to my aunt. And I'll never forget, I called her because I didn't want to call my parents because once again, I was afraid they may have been mad at me because I had done something. So I just wanted to call a relative who would just give it to me straight, but who would still like care about me. So I called my aunt, a New Yorker, straight shooter, as we all know. She was like flabbergasted. She's like, oh my gosh, you can talk? I'm like, what's happened to me? And she started from day one. She had actually met Michelle. So I think you came to the trauma one because she was telling me like, yes, your car ran into this very nice this police officer, this woman. She saved your life. She had to give you CPR, and I met her. She's such a nice woman. After the first 48 hours, I just always was breathing regularly on my own. They knew I would live, but then they were telling my parents, we don't know when she's going to be fully conscious. And if she's fully conscious, we just don't know what she'll remember and what type of person she'll be.
Doctors and nurses see the worst. Mm-hmm. You know, they see situations that are just so dire and you don't know what's going to happen. When you were talking about what happened with you and the fear that you had, now I did not do anything to get into trouble. However, when I came to, it was very similar to you, where it was in bits and pieces. You have little flashbacks. I was in the rehab center like you were, and when I got to the rehab center, there was a woman that came into my room to me. She had papers that she wanted me to sign. And I had to explain to her, I can't write. She said, that's okay, just make a mark. And I thought, I can't do this. I don't know who she is. But still at the same time, I was afraid that if I said no, they would make me leave the hospital. And I had no way of getting a hold of my husband or knowing why I was there or what I needed to do. Your thinking almost goes back to being a child.
Yes.
So you have to rely on the people that are around you. It's terrifying. I'm so glad you mentioned all of that because people who are really recovering need to realize, especially with the tiredness, it takes a long time before that goes away. I know some people are capable of going back to work, but the people that they work for don't understand that. You know, maybe there's accommodations that they can give to them that will help them so that they can begin to regain their strength. It's a long road.
There's kind of two parts to my story. There's the medical recovery, and thanks to like the quick reflexes of my guardian angel here, Michelle, like I came medically back to everything fairly quickly. The doctors were very surprised, and like I learned how to walk again, and that took about 2 weeks. So I no longer needed a wheelchair. And then from a wheelchair, I had like crutches, and then I gave up my wheelchair and my crutches in about 2 weeks after I had regained consciousness. And then I learned same amount of time, about 2 weeks to the reading and the writing. Those skills came back to me. It's like they were lying dormant. I've actually did some research on this about just the mind's ability to heal itself. And it's kind of like those skills were just lying dormant after the traumatic brain injury. Like my mind knew that I had them. I just couldn't access them until the therapy and everything and proper rest just brought those skills back to me. And a lot of times I would just think really hard at night. I would think right before I would just pass out because I was so tired. And just like that process of like, there is something. I gave my speech in April at the Minnesota Brain Injury Alliance conference. There is some research to this about the power of dreaming and sleep and how it can help the mind. And a lot of the skills came back to me, like when I would go to sleep at night and I would be thinking about them really hard. And the next morning, they just came back to me quicker because I was just thinking about them so hard. I got them back. So I recovered medically fairly quickly. In about a month and a week, I was released. The medical recovery was on the books, done, but the real recovery began when the medical recovery ended. The professional, the emotional, psychological recovery for me was 10 times as hard. And at one point I became suicidal. I had lost everything. I was the 2012 principal scholar for the state of Iowa. It's a very prestigious scholarship. And I had almost a full scholarship to get my bachelor's degree. I was going to go to Northwest Missouri State University. They had a hybrid program of online and in-person classes that I was going to try out. They had a good agreement with Kirkwood Community College here in Cedar Rapids. So I was going to go into that program and I had a full scholarship. I was going to get my bachelor's degree in business management. This was the plans I had made for myself. And then I wanted to be a corporate buyer for the place where I was working, Sam's Club. I had an internship there lined up. So that was the plan I had made for myself. And fate had different plans for me. I had to give up everything. Even though medically, like I could read and write again, I wasn't nearly in a condition to start studying for a bachelor's degree. So I had to give up the scholarship, move back home, sleep on the couch again. My little sister wouldn't even let me share the room anymore. She wasn't mean about it. She's just like, I didn't think she would be back, so I'm not giving up my room. Doctors would not let me work for a year. They put me under restrictions because they were still worried what would come back to me. I may have PTSD. I just didn't have the skills necessary to be a functional adult. So I couldn't work. I couldn't live on my own because they're still worried I would do something like leave the stove on and burn down a house. My short-term memory was so bad at that point. I would forget my middle name by lunch. Even though medically I had all the skills on the surface back to me, I was just like a broken shell. Slowly, luckily, the mind is just like any other muscle in the body. It gets stronger with exercise. And the memory started coming back to me. And after that year when I could work, because I couldn't work for a year under doctor's orders. And then I had my checkup and the doctor says, okay, she can work. She can do anything that she's able to do at this point. Let's just see what happens. At that point, if it hadn't come back to me after a year, it wasn't coming back like the days. After not working for a year and losing consciousness, it is so hard to get back into the workforce because I had no job, no source of income. I was broke. I was living on the couch. My parents told me, okay, just like get a job, find something to do with yourself. That is so hard. I remember going to interview after interview and they're like, okay, why haven't you been working for a year? And just trying to come up with a story like, I kind of had this accident, but I'm okay now. In the interview process, just like had their mouths open so that's not a good sign. I couldn't find anything. I became suicidal. I gained about 75 pounds. I became situationally depressed. I'm like, that's it. I can't do this anymore. I was 24, just turned 24.
You were just beginning. I think that's such a good message to get out to younger people because it seems like suicide is becoming more and more prevalent. And I worry about that. There are so many things that happen in our life that are true challenges, and you don't know what the answer is.
And that's what I kind of say in my book. The darkest place a person can ever find themselves that leads to the suicide, that leads to the depression, the situational depression, not clinical, that made me suicidal. So that darkest place you'll ever find yourself is where you don't feel that you can one day have hope. It doesn't matter how painful a situation is, how tragic, how desperate, as long as you feel that one day there's a possibility that things could be better, that will keep you alive. Just that possibility, that hope. I was actually writing my suicide note where my brother, my other guardian angel, came in, and I was just waiting for just the right moment because I was going to drown myself in the lake not far from the house. But I didn't want to do it when it was too hot. It was late August, and just about, I think the next day was going to be September 1st. It was getting cooler, and I had finally decided, you know what, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. And then my brother came home, looks at me and is like, you need something to do. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Here, I found you a job. Call this number. You could do this. It was food service. Besides the fact that it feeds us, it also is a great starting point for so many people. If you're willing to work hard, they're like, okay, can you do this? I had the experience because I had been like my first job when I was like 19. I was a manager at Wendy's. If you've done it before, you can do it again. Here, you start in 2 weeks. And that's what saved my life. Just, I had something finally to get my mind off of my problems. I had something just that was making me get up every day, do something besides just worrying about how much I had lost. And that is literally like, that's why I'm such a huge advocate for the dignity it gives you. And I didn't even like the job. It was serving coffee and donuts and breakfast. So I had to wake up at 3:30 in the morning to get there by 5 to open the stores. It's very easy that if you're willing to do that, it's very easy to get hired. Didn't like it, but it was something to do every day besides just be miserable. And that's what saved my life. And then eventually I wanted to share my story, and I've always loved to talk. I wanted to be a writer. So I wrote my book, and I decided I would one day be a speaker. And I started my speaking business officially in 2020. And here I am, and I'm very grateful. And my first speaking gig, I spoke in 2020 virtually to the Iowa Brain Injury Association conference. I spoke starting in 2021, just in person. Keep working for the great supervisor I have, because that's hard to find. And then just speak locally here in the Midwest for the next 10 years or so. And then we'll see what comes after that point. But this is one thing I want to close with. And I say this in my book called Maximizing Your Potential, How to Start the Journey. My story may seem amazing. I've heard other stories that are just as amazing or more traumatic, more miraculous than even my own. Everybody has a story the world hasn't heard. If you overcome the things that we all have to overcome in life to find our true purpose, you will start that journey towards true happiness. It's not just a destination. It's that journey of overcoming and finding yourself. Happiness is a journey of self-discovery. It starts with achieving a goal. For me, that was just getting back on my own, getting back on my feet, just have something to do so I didn't kill myself. And that's the true story. No other way to say it. Once you achieve that goal, you don't stop. You achieve a goal, then you find your passion. And then after I was back on my own and on my feet, I'm like, you know what? I have my own place. I'm on my feet, but what am I going to do now? What's the purpose of my life? I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to speak to people so I can share my story. So you achieve a goal, then you find your passion, then you discover your dream. And I'm living that dream right now. I'm so grateful, so happy. And once you discover the dream, you chase that for the rest of your life. And that's happiness. I wanted to do for others what my father did for me, because I didn't have any self-motivation. I felt sorry for myself. I thought my life was over because I was telling him I wasn't happy. And my father looked me in the eye and said, well, if you're not happy, you don't deserve to be happy. You feel sorry for yourself. You had all these dreams before your brain injury. You had all these dreams, all these things you wanted to accomplish. And now you don't think you can do anything anymore. What he said always stayed in the back of my mind. Once I was back on my feet, I thought about my father's words. I don't believe other people can truly motivate us. Only we can motivate ourselves. But other people, like my father did me, can inspire us to motivate ourselves.
I think you've done a remarkable job, and I think the words that you've had to say today are going to help a lot. But I want to get back to Michelle for a minute. I want to find out, as a guardian angel, how long have you been personal friends now? How did that happen?
I remember Michelle can story, but we actually connected through Facebook. I was getting back in social media, and then Michelle and I connected, and then we actually met for the first time in person. It was actually the 5-year anniversary of the accident. See, that was it. It's done. It's fate. You're my guardian angel.
Well, and I had reached out to Danielle because I went down and visited her at the University of Iowa hospitals, even though she wasn't conscious. I just, you hate to see somebody that have such a horrific injury. And then I kind of basically Facebook stalked her and saw, like,
I'm so glad
she was an inspiration. Like, she didn't let the brain injury keep her down and live on disability for the rest of her life because she didn't fight. She didn't want to fight. I'm going to reach out to her because she truly is an inspiration.
This has been such a wonderful story, and I'm so glad we've had an opportunity to share it. I'm so happy to have you both here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Just remember, everybody, don't count us out. God bless. Have a great day. Bye-bye.